do want to thank you for moving forward at Scott's request. I've seen people fight that tooth and nail, but I do have to give you a warning. When you sit closer to the front, I can tell whether your eyes are open or closed. And a second warning, when you come this far up, there's no going back. We are not of them that draw back under perdition, but of them that believe to the saving of the soul. Hebrews chapter 10, down I think the very last verse, or next to the last verse. Anyway, I do appreciate you being here. I'm not sure why our numbers are as low tonight as they are, but it is always a privilege to me to preach God's Word, and especially I enjoy preaching to people that I know are here because they want to hear God's Word. Now, that's not a criticism of those who aren't here, that we have older people that can only make it out once a day, if that, and we have other situations going on, and I'm not trying to criticize that, but I am trying to praise you for your desire to be here. Having said that, let me see if I can insult you. We were told something in school that we're probably not supposed to repeat out loud, especially in front of a group of people, but I was told more than once, never underestimate the ignorance of your audience. And I want you to know I do not underestimate your ignorance. Of course, I don't underestimate my own ignorance either. Sometimes, when a young man and a young lady are introduced to each other, it kind of sparks an interest. There's a desire to know more. And the investigation continues long after the introduction. In this series of lessons that we're looking at here, I want to introduce you to the book of Proverbs in such a way that your interest will be sparked and that you will continue to investigate long after this series of lessons is over. Now, I realize that for some of you this is not the first introduction. I realize that some of you have had a kind of a ongoing love affair with the book of Proverbs for a long time. But if you haven't, understand that it is well worth the time. It is well worth the effort. Many of you have been reading and studying this book for many years. Your life has already been enhanced, made more full, and made more joyous because of the things found in this book. Some of you could point to specific passages probably and point out pitfalls in life that you have escaped or avoided because of the things that are spoken of in this book of Proverbs. Those of you who have had this ongoing relationship with this book, maybe for many, many years, I'm not worried that you're going to fall asleep during this or discount what I'm saying, because those who know it best seem hungering and thirsting to hear it like the rest, is what we sing sometimes. And I think that's certainly true about this book. There is depth to the book of Proverbs, but it's not philosophical in nature. At least the way we sometimes think of the word philosophy. It's about wisdom, and it's about loving wisdom, and that's what the word philosophy means, love of wisdom. But it's not about old men sitting around talking about if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a noise if there's no one to hear it. It's not that kind of philosophy. It is very, very practical in nature. Many of the themes of this book parallel what we would read, for instance, in the book of James and the practical application of that in the New Testament. This book addresses interpersonal relationships. It teaches us how to get along with others. It cautions us about things that will hurt us, things that will interfere with us being successful and having joy in this life. It's amazingly relevant to our daily living, this book of Proverbs. It teaches sound financial principles that we need to pay heed to. It warns us against laziness, and it teaches us the principle of diligence. Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways. This book addresses alcohol use and other dangerous things in our world. In fact, sometimes this book may be a little more practical than we feel comfortable with, because sometimes it shows us the areas wherein we are being unwise, the areas where we need to make some changes in our use of time and talents, in our choice of companions, in male-female relationships, in finances, and many other things. We don't always enjoy being corrected, do we? Well, that's really a major part of this lesson when we get to it. But because of that, there may be some things about this book that are a little too practical to be comfortable to us. Somebody's thinking right now, Rusty, this is the Old Testament. We don't follow the Old Testament. This is the Old Testament. This is God-breathed. This is inspiration speaking to us. And while we are not under Old Testament law, we need to understand that the principles taught in the book of Proverbs are not dependent on and they're not restricted to the old law. They're principles of what is wise in our world, what is helpful and beneficial in our world, what is dangerous in our world. There's nothing here about sacrificing lambs. There's nothing here about the Sabbath law and how to observe it. There's nothing here about the priesthood and holy and unholy meats and things like that. That's not what this book is about. This book is about practical learning. Practical, wise, successful behavior does not change from law to law, folks. Evil companions are harmful in any age and at any age. Older people, since we always direct that, evil companions thing toward younger people. Adultery is a danger in all cultures. Wine is a mocker, and strong drink is raging, and whosoever is deceived thereby is not wise. That's true in any dispensation. That was true for Noah under the patriarchal age. That was true when Solomon wrote those words about it here in the book of Proverbs under the Mosaic age. And it's true for us today when we read in 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8 that we are supposed to be sober, free from the influence of intoxicants, because the devil is looking to swallow us down. These things are practical, wise, successful behaviors that are set forth for us and for our learning. Let's talk about the purpose of the book of Proverbs. Turn your Bibles, please, to Proverbs chapter 1. Proverbs chapter 1. And Solomon is going to set forth here very plainly the purpose that he has in writing. Now, don't misunderstand me. It's inspiration. He's writing because God inspired him. But God inspired him to tell what the purpose of this book is. So here in Proverbs 1, 1 through 7, the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, verse 2, to know wisdom and instruction. That's one of the purposes here. To perceive or understand words of understanding. Verse 3, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, and judgment, and equity. Verse 4, to give subtlety to the simple. The man who is unwise, the man who is ignorant about what is good and beneficial and helpful can gain an understanding from this. And to the young man, knowledge and discretion. Verse 5, a wise man will hear and will increase learning. So the man who doesn't have wisdom can gain it from this book, and the man who has it can gain more from this book, is what is being stated here. A wise man will hear and will increase learning, and a man of understanding shall attain unto wise counsels. To understand a proverb and the interpretation, the words of the wise and their dark sayings. And then he sets this forth as the starting point. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Isn't it interesting that he begins this book at the point of the fear of the Lord? He ends the book of Ecclesiastes with, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter, fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. This is from beginning to end what we need to remember and keep in our hearts, this fear and respect for God and His Word. In the next few weeks, it is our intention to look at these themes. Tonight we're looking at wisdom and correction, or wisdom and instruction. We'll be talking about companions. We'll be talking about laziness and diligence. We'll be talking about the danger of adultery. We'll be talking about alcohol. We'll be talking about the tongue. You know, even a fish wouldn't get in trouble if he keep his mouth shut. Right? And this book teaches that principle. It is my prayer that this brief study will cause you to study this book in greater depth, to read it more often. We can't possibly understand or touch on all of the themes in this book. And any one that we do touch on, we're only touching the hem of the garment for that theme. So it's my prayer that you will spend more time with this book. I heard some really good advice many years ago. There's 31 chapters in the book of Proverbs. If you were to read a chapter a day, you would read through it basically 12 times in the year, and you would gain much in knowledge and in wisdom, trying to understand and practice the practical everyday principles that are found herein. So, let's talk about wisdom and correction. First, wisdom. Vines defines this word, this Old Testament word. It's the knowledge and ability to make the right choice at the opportune time. Sometimes we make the right choice and it's too late or too early. But to make the right choice at the opportune time is the practical side of wisdom. This word wisdom in its adjective form occurs 132 times. The wise man, the adjective form, 132 times in the Old Testament, but most frequently in the book of Job, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes, which is why we call these books the wisdom literature of the Bible, okay? Because that's what it is about. Look with me at Proverbs chapter 8, please. Here we see wisdom being personified. What I mean by that is wisdom is being written about here as if wisdom were a person talking to us. Okay? Beginning in verse 1. Doth not wisdom cry, and understanding put forth her voice? She standeth at the top of high places, by the way in the places of the paths. She crieth at the gates, at the entry of the city, at the coming in, at the doors. So she's being personified, and now it's going to be her, wisdom, speaking to us here in this passage. We see the emphasis on how valuable wisdom is, beginning in verse 6, where she says, Hear, for I will speak of excellent things, and the opening of my lips shall be right things. For my mouth shall speak truth, and wickedness is an abomination to my lips. All the words of my mouth are in righteousness. There is nothing froward or perverse in them. They are all plain to him that understandeth, and right to them that find knowledge. Receive my instruction, and not silver. Knowledge rather than choice gold. For wisdom is better than rubies, and all the things that may be desired are not to be compared to it. When I talk about maybe reading one of the chapters of the book of Proverbs every day and doing that month after month, you may think, well, my schedule's too busy. I work too many hours. Well, you're going to gain a lot more from that than you are from your work. Because wisdom claims to be more valuable than gold, more valuable than rubies. It is truly a valuable thing. In verses 18 and 19, riches and honor are with me, wisdom says. Yea, durable riches and righteousness. My fruit is better than gold, yea, than fine gold. My revenue than choice silver. Wisdom here claims to be the path to success. Verse 14, counsel is mine, and sound wisdom. I am understanding. I have strength. By me kings reign, and princes decree justice. By me princes rule, and nobles, even all the judges of the earth. But one of the things in this passage that's so important is that wisdom claims to be available, attainable. It claims to be something we can choose to have. Verse 17, wisdom says, I love them that love me, and those that seek me early shall find me. Now, when we understand that wisdom comes from the Lord, the wisdom that is talked about in this book, and we're talking about the wisdom of God, this is the same kind of assurance that we see in Matthew chapter 7 when Jesus says, seek and ye shall find. Wisdom says, the one who seeks me finds me. It's an assurance that the one who is truly seeking after God and what He wants for us, that God will, Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 6, reward that one who diligently seeks Him. That the one who wants to know God's will can know God's will. That the wisdom that comes from God is attainable for us. And then we see the urging here to choose wisdom. Verses 4 and 5, unto you, O men, I call, and my voice is to the sons of men. O ye simple, understand wisdom. And ye fools, be ye of an understanding heart. Look down at beginning of verse 32 and going through the end of the chapter. Here we read, now therefore hearken unto me, O ye children, for blessed are they that keep my ways. Hear instruction and be wise, and refuse it not. Blessed is the man that heareth me, watching daily at my gates, waiting at the posts of my doors. For whoso findeth me, findeth life, and shall obtain favor of the Lord. But he that sinneth against me, against wisdom, wrongeth his own soul. All they that hate me love death. Wisdom is available for us if we will be serious about seeking it. We ought to choose wisdom because of how valuable it is, because it comes to us from God. So here's my question. Why do so many people reject, or at the very least neglect, the wisdom that comes from God? Why is it that we're more diligent about not missing our favorite television shows than we are about studying our Bibles? Well, let's go on to the second part of this, wisdom and correction. Maybe we can understand why this is this way for us. There is a connection here. It's an inextricable link. It's actually either an upward spiral or a downward spiral. There's a connection here between wisdom and correction or instruction. Look back with me at chapter 1, please. I'm going to go through these verses so you see them up there. But in chapter 1, verses 2 and 3, Solomon wrote the purpose of the book to know wisdom and instruction. Those two words linked together there in verse 2 are actually wisdom and correction, or at least correction is one of the ways that this word instruction can be translated. You may even have it that way in the version you're looking at. I'm not sure. But wisdom is connected with correction, with instruction that changes our path, that demands us to do something different than we did before. To know wisdom and instruction, he says in verse 2. In verse 3, he says to receive the instruction of wisdom. That's the same two words. Again, linked together. Okay? In verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. The same two words in the Hebrew there, linked together. wisdom and instruction or correction are inextricably linked together. Look with me over at chapter 8 and verse 33. We already read it. Let's read it again. Hear instruction and be wise. There we have the same root word in the original for wise or wisdom. This is the adjective here. But hear instruction and be wise. Those same two words, again, linked together. In Proverbs 19 and verse 20, hear counsel and receive instruction or correction, that thou mayest be wise in thy latter end. And then go back to chapter 15, verse 31. The ear that heareth reproof of life abideth among the wise. But he that refuseth instruction despiseth his own soul. But he that heareth reproof getteth understanding. The fear of the Lord is the instruction of wisdom, and before honor is humility. The wise man accepts correction and gets wiser. That's that upward spiral. Okay? He's wise, he accepts correction, he gets wiser, he accepts correction. Or the fool despises instruction, won't listen to rebuke, will not be reproved, and gets more foolish and more foolish. And that's that downward spiral. These things are inextricably linked. So if we ask the question, why is it, if wisdom is so valuable and such a wonderful thing, why is it that more people aren't just raking it in? Because it's uncomfortable. Because it demands change of us. Let's go on here and break this down a little bit. Some practical applications. Number one, realize your need. Never underestimate your own ignorance. Never think, I don't need the book of Proverbs anymore. I've got it down. I don't care if you got the whole book memorized. You don't have it down. Never underestimate your own ignorance. I know you're ignorant. I know I'm ignorant. When we're looking at God and the kind of wisdom that He wants us to have, to be able to perceive right and wrong in a situation, to be able to determine the correct course through a difficult problem or whatever it happens to be. It's found in God's wisdom, but we need to realize the need that we have. This is just exactly the opposite of humanism. Our young people have been taught in schools for decades, and it's only getting worse, that you have the answers in you. And teachers will tell you, if you ask them some kind of question, well, just what does your heart tell you? Jeremiah 10:23, O Lord, I know that the way of man is not in himself. It is not in man that walketh to direct his steps. Doesn't matter what your heart's telling you. It might be right, it might be wrong, it might not even be related to what the true issues are. What matters is what God is telling you. Realize our own ignorance. Realize our own need. That it is not in man that walketh to direct our steps. You see how uncomfortable this is. We like to walk our own way. We don't like telling me someone that's not the right way to handle that. Growth is painful many times. Right here in this book, Proverbs 14 and verse 12, Proverbs 16 and verse 25, I believe they're word for word the same. There is a way which seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. Realize your own need. Number two, seek advice and listen to it. Go back to Proverbs 6 with me, please. Wonderful, wonderful passage here to remind us of why God formed the family the way He formed the family. Why God wanted children to grow up with godly parents, a mother and father, to help guide them through life. In Proverbs 6, beginning in verse 20, "My son, keep thy father's commandment, and forsake not the law of thy mother." You know, there are things that I do today. I'm not talking about how I brush my teeth. I'm talking about serious things that have moral implications and so forth, that I learned because my mother said to me, don't do this or do that, as a godly mother. He says, "My son, keep thy father's commandment. Forsake not the law of thy mother. Bind them." That's those laws that our parents gave us. "Bind them continually upon thine heart, and tie them about thy neck. When thou goest, it shall lead thee. When thou sleepest, it shall keep thee. And when thou awakest, it shall talk with thee. For the commandment is a lamp, and the law is light, and reproofs of instruction are the way of life." He's not talking about their God's instruction. He's talking about the fact that God gave us parents to direct us in this world. I've met some terrible parents. I worked at 2 different children's homes, and I have met parents who neglected, abused, treated their children. I've met some who were in prison because of the way they treated their children, and some that should have been. Terrible parents. But the regular way of things in life is that parents want good things for children. And parents have more knowledge about life than children have, because they've lived it longer. And it's God's design, it's God's plan that we listen to our parents, that we seek that advice, and that we listen to it. In Proverbs 11 and verse 14, he broadens this out a little bit. He says there, "Where no counsel is," that word counsel means advice. "Where no counsel is, the people fall. But in the multitude of counselors, there is safety." Proverbs 15 and verse 22. "Without counsel, purposes are disappointed. But in the multitude of counselors, they are established." Proverbs 24 and verse 6. "For by wise counsel thou shalt make war, and in multitude of counselors there is safety." Seek and listen to advice from godly people. Now, you have to be careful about that. Certainly want advice from godly people, but you also have to be careful about another thing that comes there. You remember Solomon's son, Rehoboam, when he became king, and the people came to him, led by Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, and they said, "Your father made our yoke heavy. I mean, we had a heavy tax burden. Lighten the yoke." He said, and this was good. He didn't give an immediate answer. He said, "Will you come back?" What did he say? 3 days or something like that. He said, "Come back." And he went and he sought advice. He sought advice from the older men, which was a good place to seek it. And they said, "If you do what they ask you, you're going to bind these people to them and you're going to rule them forever." And then he went and asked his friends. The younger men, it says. The ones that were his age, the ones that he had grown up with, who didn't have any reason to be any more knowledgeable about life than he was. And they said, "You answer them harshly. You tell them, my father's yoke was heavy. My little finger is going to be thicker than my father's loins. He chastised you with whips. I'll chastise you with scorpions." And guess who he listened to? There's a danger when we talk about a multitude of counselors and the wisdom that comes from that we will go forum shopping and we'll get counsel until we get the one we wanted before we started, right? Instead of receiving instruction and correction, which is really what this book is about. being willing to change our attitudes because of the things that we hear. So we have first realizing the need that we have. Secondly, seeking and listening to advice from godly people. And number three, seeking God's wisdom. Not just wisdom from people or even people in the church, but seeking God's wisdom. Here in this book, for example, or in this broader book, the Bible. 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 15, and that from a child thou hast known the holy scriptures which are able to make thee wise unto salvation. Turn over, please, to James chapter 3. I told you there's going to be some parallel things between this book and the book of James. This is one of those things. James chapter 3, beginning in verse 13 and going down through the end of the chapter. Who is a wise man and endued with knowledge among you? Let him show out of a good conversation or manner of life or good conduct his works with meekness of wisdom. But if ye have bitter envying and strife in your hearts, glory not and lie not against the truth. Watch this. This wisdom, what wisdom? The wisdom of bitter envying and strife and so forth. That wisdom, this wisdom, descendeth not from above, but is earthly, sensual, devilish. He says, verse 16, for where envying and strife is, there is confusion in every evil work. But in verse 17, he says, but the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality, without hypocrisy. The fruit of righteousness is sown in peace of them that make peace. There's a wisdom that is from above, that we should be seeking to guide us in our lives, that we should be looking for regularly. Study this great book of Proverbs and all of the Bible if you want to truly be wise. It is relevant to everything in our lives. And in the book of Proverbs, I'm just saying, there are 31 chapters. Might be a good exercise for us. I'm just saying, okay? Number 4, we need to accept correction and rebuke. And we need to do so with meekness. You might want to stick your finger here in James. We're going to come back to it in just a minute. But first, let's go back to the book of Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 3. Verses 11 and 12. Solomon says, my son, despise not thou the chastening of the Lord, neither be weary of his correction. For whom the Lord loveth, he correcteth, even as a father the son in whom he delighteth. The chastening of the Lord can come to us in various ways. Certainly it comes to us through this book. Also comes to us through one another. As we interact and you say to one another, maybe you need to rethink that, or that wasn't the best thing for a Christian to be doing. What kind of example are you setting? And on and on and on, those kind. That's the chastening of the Lord. But the emphasis here is not to despise the chastening of the Lord. Not to get discouraged and give up or faint when thou art rebuked of him. Turn back to chapter 1 of James, please. James chapter 1. Verses 18 through 22. We've got a few minutes and I want to look at them to see some connection. Sometimes when we read the book of James, we're tempted to read it as if they are disjointed statements or commands. And these are not disjointed, especially here. Notice this in particular. In verse 18, we are told of his own will. This is the Father of lights, with whom is no variableness, neither shadow of turning. Of his own will begat he us. How did he do it? Through the word of truth. That's how he begat us. That's how we were born again, not of corruptible seed, 1 Peter chapter 1, but of incorruptible by the word of God that liveth and abideth forever. The Father of lights begat us with the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruits of His creation. Wherefore, my beloved brethren, listen to it, is what he says. Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear. What? That word of truth that He has caused us to be born again with. Let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. Have you ever noticed, discussing the Bible, people get angry real quick? I have a good friend who was in a chat room discussing the plan of salvation with some people. And he made the observation, he said, I can't believe that so many of you who claim to be Christians are reacting so harshly to what I'm saying. And they said, what do you mean? He said, look back over your comments. There were threats to kill him. There were people get angry at the chastising of the Lord, at the word of truth by which we are born again and made new and guided in this world. And he's saying, be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, for the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. Instead of getting angry, lay apart all filthiness and superfluity or overabundance of naughtiness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, that word of truth that He's trying to give to us. Receive with meekness the implanted word which is able to save your soul. But be ye doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving your own selves. And on we could read and see what's being talked about here. But you can't get more practical than this. I need to open my ears and close my mouth and change my attitude and my behaviors based on the wisdom that is from above, based on the wisdom that God gives us, based on the word of truth. Let's talk for just a brief moment here about poor responses that people have when they're corrected. Because this interferes with us being able to interact as Christians as we ought to interact as Christians. Sometimes you talk to someone, you say, I heard you say this, and that's really not a good way for a Christian to talk. Yeah, well, you should have heard what so-and-so said. Or, yeah, but I've heard you say some terrible things. Or even, who are you to correct me? Look at your own sin before you come talking. This one really gets me. When people say, well, yeah, you might be right, but I don't like the way you said that to me. So what? Correcting someone is not an easy thing. And sometimes it doesn't come out exactly the way we want it to, but we do it in love. We don't do it because we're trying to hurt someone. And if it's true, what does it matter how they brought it to us if it's true? The wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. We need to not react with anger at things like this. Open my ears, close my mouth, and change my attitudes and my behavior. The wisdom that is from above. This is what we're striving for. This is what we want to have to live in our world. This morning we were talking about, I'm watching the clock, don't worry. This morning we were talking about being lights in the world. And I was actually watching the clock too closely this morning and ended up skipping over something at the end of my lesson that I should have brought to you. I think it goes well with what we're talking about. If we're going to be lights in this world, it's going to be because we're following God's wisdom. If we don't follow God's wisdom, we're not going to be lights in this world. It's that simple. We have to stop getting our cues from social media, from the internet, from our teachers, from the television set, from movies. We have to start getting our guidance from God. Look to it to shape us and mold us and make us what we ought to be. In Isaiah chapter 60, if you want to look at that very quickly. Isaiah chapter 60, verses 1 through 3. He says, arise, shine, for thy light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee. Could we say that as Christians? God's light is risen on us, the glory of the Lord. Yes, we should be able to say that as Christians. So our obligation is then to shine. Verse 2, for behold, the darkness shall cover the earth, and gross darkness the people. But the Lord shall arise upon thee, and his glory shall be seen upon thee. And the Gentiles shall come to thy light, and kings to the brightness of thy rising. What a marvelous, hopeful passage. If we will accept the guidance of God, the wisdom that is from above, the guidance for how He wants us to walk and live and interact in this world. I say one of those duh things that we ought to know. It ought to be just a duh, but sometimes we forget. God knows better than we do. His way is better than our way. His guidance is better than anything we can dream up on our own or anything our friends are going to tell us. God knows best. I need thee every hour. Am I remembering that right, Randy? I need thee every... Isn't that what we're talking about here? That we need God, that we need His guidance every hour. That we need His presence all of the time. And of course, He promises that to His children. The eyes of the Lord are over the righteous, and His ears are open unto their prayers. But the face of the Lord is against them that do evil. 1 Peter chapter 3, I think verse 12. He promises His presence with us. Lo, I'm with you always, even unto the end of the world. I need thee every hour is a plea and a reminder of our own ignorance, our need for our God. If you're not a Christian tonight, if you're not a child of God, those promises are not for you, but they could be. If you will come believing, repenting, confessing, you can be baptized into Jesus for the remission of your sins. If you have any other need, this is the time. Won't you come as we stand and sing?